Hi, this is Tim and Joel. Welcome to Midwest Hunting and Outdoors by Two Dumbasses,
a podcast about the outdoors, hunting,
and being a steward of the land. Welcome to Midwest Hunting and Outdoors by Two Dumbasses. We've got a special guest here that we're excited to introduce here in a minute. But before we do that, Tim, let's talk about how people can see our podcasts and where can they see us.
You bet. So during one of our last episodes, we talked about we had some difficulties with YouTube, and we've got those since rectified. So we're now on YouTube. We're starting to see an increase in our subscribers. We also are on Twitter and Instagram. We're trying to figure that out, trying to figure out how that fits in our niche, because really that's just for you posting off your phone, and people use it on their phone, and again trying to figure out how that fits in for what we're trying to offer and deliver. And then lastly, our Facebook page really coming along. So those are the ways people can reach us, and also we have an email out there that if people want to contact us that way. But we really look at our at the comments on our videos and podcasts that you can get to us. And then getting back to the audio versions of the podcast, we are out there. We're on 7 different platforms today, soon to be on Stitcher. We've got Overcast. We are on Spotify. We are on iTunes. So reach out to wherever you get your podcasts, and you can catch us there. And we really appreciate your support and subscribing.
I think just go to Google and type in Midwest Hunting and Outdoors.
Yep.
And you'll find something.
That's right.
Something on us.
One other thing is we also have, as we mentioned in our last episode, that we've been getting some T-shirts, some hats. We're getting set up so that people have been asking how they could support us. We're not looking to make a ton of money, just maybe kind of help us defer some of our costs. So we have some new shirts that you can buy off of eBay, and got the Buy Two Dumbasses, our logo on the back, and you can get those off of eBay, and we have that link on on the back of this episode, and we'll also have the link also on our Facebook page. So really appreciate that. And this shirt here actually is Jeremy's, because we are starting to give all our guests a shirt for helping us out and joining our efforts. So thanks so much, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Cool. So before we get to Jeremy, even though he's got his free shirt already, so hang in there. There's no such thing as a free shirt,
right. Just
like a free lunch, Jeremy. Before we get to that, we always start off our episodes with, what have you been up to this week? So, Tim, you want to talk about what you've been up to?
Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about putting up cameras and stuff, about putting in that kind of lull before you really start to put in your last set of food plots, etc. So I ended up putting up quite a few cameras. And then also we had a good dear friend of ours come down to visit us. And 4 years ago, we put in a pollinator program in the CRP. And it was CP42, and it's been about, like I said, 4 years, and it takes about 3 years before those flowers and those forbs start to really pop up. And this dear friend of ours asked us, like, well, how many of those flowers of those species that you planted have come up? And I said, well, I don't know. That's a good question. And she goes, well, I'm going to come over there and we're going to go out and do an identification, because she's a master gardener. So I said, all right. So I ended up digging back into my email records and finding out what did I plant. And then I went and created these spec sheets for each of those items. So, hey, I had pictures and then the descriptions. And then for me also, hey, management-wise, how do you manage it? Is it good for fire burning, not good for fire burning, stuff like that. So I thought that'd be good for me since I was already at it. And so we had 21 species that we planted. And of that 21, we found 20.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I was pretty excited, and it was a lot more fun than I thought it would be. So we're going to continue to build out those spec sheets, but build those spec sheets out for the farm. So we know what we got, and both good and bad, right? So we got thistle, and I now know what that water hemp, or
We're going to talk about water hemp here in a little bit.
yeah, it's not your friend.
Yeah, for sure.
So
For sure.
that's what I did.
Awesome. Well, I know people are tired of hearing my stories about mowing, et cetera, so I'll leave that out. But a discovery I had on my bean field is Roundup, and still not killing these weeds. So I literally picked a weed, took it into the ag service in the local area here, and found out that I'm battling water hemp. So I walked in with the weed, and I said, I need two things. What is this weed, and then how do I kill it? And they said, it's water hemp. Like everybody in stereo, it's water hemp, and you can't kill it, not with Roundup. So, but after some conversations, I talked to some folks there, and we ended up with a cocktail of Roundup, some crop oil, and Blazer is the prescription for it. And I sprayed that 2 weeks, and I'm sitting here with a bigger smile on my face and a happier man because my bean field's pretty good shape. I think I need to go back and probably hit it one more time, but there's nothing higher than the beans now from a weed standpoint, and so I'm super happy about that small victory I had.
Now you've had a couple issues with some invasive species. So you had water hemp. I didn't even know what the heck water hemp was, and now you also had, was it something garlic? I forget what it was.
Well, we'll talk about that. But wild garlic,
wild garlic.
I think everybody that land in the state of Iowa probably has the wild garlic problem. But, yes, which leads me to our introduction here of our guest. Jeremy, I'll let you introduce yourself, and your official title is District Forester for the state of Iowa?
Right. My name is Jeremy Cochran, and I'm the District Forester for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. And my forestry office is in Sheraton at the Stevens State Forest Headquarters. And I provide technical assistance, forestry advice to private landowners in south central Iowa, and it includes Marion, Mahaska counties, Lucas and Monroe counties, and Wayne and Appalachia counties.
So if folks are in those counties, you're the contact for them for any questions from a forestry standpoint.
Yep, that's right. So, 85% of Iowa's forest land is owned by private landowners, and that's what we do. Is we want to encourage people to long-term manage their forests to help meet their goals and for healthy forests across Iowa.
So Jeremy, if they're not in one of those counties, how do they go about finding some of those people that might manage those other counties in the state?
Yeah, so the best way to get a hold of the district foresters is actually on the Iowa Department of Natural Resources website. So if you go to iowadnr.gov and click on the conservation tab, and that'll bring up a whole host of menus, and on there you can click on forestry or forestry landowner assistance.
And then how many foresters are in the state?
There's about 10 district foresters. They're with our cooperating agencies that we work a lot with. There's about 16 or 18 of us right now.
Okay. And before we get into the more in depth here, let's talk about what have you been up to for the last couple weeks? Yeah.
Well, this week I finished putting up my firewood for 2021 and almost to 2022. So that was working through the brutal humidity since 4th of July. It was nice to get that done. So it's all split. Dry.
Man, that's awesome.
Waiting for winter. I like to be a ways ahead if I can be.
Well, you are a ways ahead
So,
if you're thinking 2020.
I ended up with a minor injury last January, February, couldn't cut firewood. So that's one of the reasons I like to be quite a ways ahead. So anyway, finished cutting firewood. Been to the gun club a couple times, our local sportsman's club. We had a handgun shoot last weekend with real good turnout. Had a ton of fun, shot a lot of rounds. Went back to the gun range on Tuesday night, setting in my rifle. We're getting ready for a rifle shoot coming up pretty soon here. So,
Awesome.
yeah, got to help band wood ducks last night with the wildlife biologist at the raccoon unit. That was pretty neat.
So what do you do with that? I mean, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was my first time banding wood ducks. I love to waterfowl hunt, and I just love, I'm in forestry, man. I love everything about the natural world. So getting to go out with them and go out to the trap and to be able to handle the birds, look over the feathers, to be able to ID them, sex them. Then he puts the leg band on them and you toss them up in the air and they fly away. So maybe someday I'll see one of those again during duck season.
What's the trap? What's the trap look like?
It's super interesting, and I'm getting off into the weeds quite a bit here for me. It's so they'll use corn to bring the birds into the pen, and they can come and go and eat as they please, so they're comfortable. And then at some point during that time, they'll slip in there and shut the cage up, so they're in the pen. And then when I came out to help them, we put them into a little staging box, the ducks into a staging box, and we can let the little chicks go. So we banded 11 wood ducks and then let 7 more chicks go.
That'd be super interesting to watch.
How cool is
Oh,
that?
yeah. I helped with geese a couple years ago. That's interesting, challenging, messy, and dirty.
I always envision, you see on TV with the net that gets shot over top of them, right? Things like that.
I've helped a couple of times and we haven't used those tools. They use them for other species, but we haven't the times I've helped. So it's important for conservation and species management. Gives them good research.
Sure.
Cool. Going back to my introduction with the water hemp, can you relate? Is that cringing?
So I don't have to battle that very much, except for maybe in new tree plantings, and we can often grow trees and shrubs through that. My most recent experience was actually simply watching an Iowa State Extension agronomy video and trying to identify the difference between water hemp and pigweed.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for more information, reach out. It's out there.
Yeah, it's just it's nasty,
Yeah.
right? So it's nasty. All right, well, getting back more on topic, so district forester, if you kind of could describe to the audience here and to us, what is that role? What does that look like? What would your job description look like?
Okay, so for the most part, I spend most of my time working with private landowners in Iowa, such as you guys, and evaluating, figuring out what your goals are for the property, short-term, 10-year goals, long-term, 50, 100-year goals. It's really hard to get people to think out that far. That's one of the things. Meet with landowners, help them evaluate their forest land, figure out what they have, and then provide advice for how to manage the forest to meet those goals. And it could be a lot of different things. It could be just for natural beauty, for biodiversity, for songbird habitat, deer, turkey habitat, all the game species, non-game species, saw timber production, and quite a few of landowner goals will mesh, and you'll be able to do multiple use forestry. Outdoor recreation, wood production, water quality, soil conservation, those can all meld together. Or you can be strict and stick with a specific goal. Every landowner is different. That's part of my job, is trying to figure out what they really want and need.
Probably step one, right?
Yep.
So, and on a previous episode, we had Kevin Anderson here, that Kevin, and he's a biologist, but similar approach, just different scope, it sounds like.
That's right.
All right, so let's talk about the landowner has contacted you. It could be like Tim and I contacting you, fairly new with property, or someone has property and like, hey, I heard this podcast on YouTube and out there talking about there's some support from the Iowa DNR for forestry. Where do you start? What are the steps when someone contacts you, Kevin?
Okay, so one of the first things is try to figure out really what they need, what they want and what they need. Then that gets the landowner thinking more specifically about what they want out of their forest. And you've got to think about that in a diverse way. Forests are incredibly complex. What you do to the trees in the overstory affects the trees in the understory. What you do in the ground layer, the herbaceous layer, affects trees in overstory. So it's very interrelated. Just try to get them thinking about, okay, what do we want out of the forest today? What do we want out of the forest in 10 years? And what do we want the forest to be like in 50 or 100 years? What we do in the forest today affects the forest land for a long time. Maybe somebody else that owns land, somebody we may not even know. So get them thinking about goals. And then once you figure out what they want and what they need, then you start to gather enough information and schedule a site visit. You got to find out what you have in your forest land. And so the first thing to do is what we call a timber cruise. We'll meet with the landowner for the site visit, interview with the landowner, narrow in their goals, focus on their goals a lot more, talk about goals while you're in the woods and looking at different types of trees, forest, oak hickory forest or cottonwood forest or black walnut forest. Goals will be slightly different in those areas. So through the process of site visit, interview, and then do a timber cruise, that's where the expert forester will evaluate what species you have, what health they're in, what size class, what age, what's in the understory, what's in your herbaceous layer, what you have for invasive species, all these variety of things, and then really bringing that all together into a plan, and what we call a stewardship plan, a forest stewardship plan. So once you have a forest stewardship plan, that identifies what resources you have for your forest, what condition they're currently in, and recommendations, what objective for that stand to do that will meet your goals or to help you meet your goals, whether it's today or 50 years from now. Because forestry is very much long-term. Oak rotation. Rotation is a term we use from the time an acorn sprouts until the trees are mature. That can vary a little bit per landowner, but a 22-inch diameter white oak or something at 130 years old. So wow. Yeah, so it's incredibly hard for landowners to think in that big of a scale. I do that every day. I get that perspective every day, and look at more than 100 timbers a year and provide advice for those stands. I get to see so many different levels of where a forest is at and be able to bring it all together and apply and give that advice to a person in a stewardship plan.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm just thinking out loud here with you. So based on the objective, when you're sitting down saying, hey, what is the objective of your property? That really could sway the feedback that you're going to give in your observation when you do your cruise, right?
Yes, absolutely. So it's important to keep the communication going with your expert, whoever. That's the same whether you're doing fisheries management in your pond or prairie management or forest management. Keep your communication going with your expert. The more you learn and the farther you get into things, your perspective is going to change. Your goals probably will change with that. Therefore, your objectives to achieve those goals will probably be adjusted as well.
So, a quick question. So you said you see 100 forests a year roughly. What would you say is the condition of the forest in the state, just roughly?
Yeah, so I'll speak a little bit to southern Iowa for the most part. We have quite a bit of oak in southern Iowa. That's some of our favorite species for wildlife purposes, for saw timber purposes, for genetic diversity. So oak is awesome. That's the biggest reason I moved to southern Iowa, is for the oak resource. But we're losing forest land. We've lost over 500,000 acres of forest land in the last 5 years in Iowa.
Wow.
So that should be an alarm for everyone. Anyone concerned with wildlife habitat or soil conservation and water quality, that's a major concern. So loss of forest land and parcelization of forest land, the size of each parcel is shrinking very, very rapidly. And then also invasive species. Invasive species are incredibly expensive to manage and get rid of. And almost every timber stand is battling at least one invasive species, if not multiples.
And I'd like to put you on hold for the invasive
Yep.
species because we're going to have a whole segment here in this episode around that.
Now the Lola grass doesn't fit into that. It's not an invasive species.
Well,
It may be
it
dominant.
depends on your objective, I guess, Tim. I'm figuring these DNR guys out. It depends on your objective. That's always the answer, right? It could be.
Let me give you a little perspective on the parcelization. In 1990 in Iowa, there were 55,000 landowners that owned a piece of forest land. And today, there's about 138,000 owners of forest land parcels. So the average parcel that each person owns has shrunk massively. Currently, it's about 12 acres, average 12 acres per landowner, forest landowner. And the number of owners has skyrocketed in that same window since 1990. So it's been a very rapid change. So that puts a lot of stress on our resource for a lot of very in-depth reasons. One, it's managing oak forests for long term. Usually, you got to cut trees at some point. And when you have a real small parcel, sometimes it's hard for people to do that. So that's a major threat to our oak resource. Just a thing that worries me when you have real small parcels. So
Okay. Because I was going to ask, I mean, and I know the answer, it depends, right? Depends on your objectives before I even ask this question. However, so I get it. What I hear from you is, hey, going from bigger parcels to smaller parcels, and then ownership of those bigger parcels is getting split by 3 times into a lot more people owning smaller pieces of the pie, basically. And what are the pros and cons of a big parcel versus a small parcel?
yeah, it depends on your goals. So
There's an underlying theme here, you know.
I'll come back to answer your question in a minute.
All right.
I used to have a 1-page paper that I would hand to a new landowner and ask them, fill this out, check the boxes. This will help you identify your goals. To try to get them focused in and thinking on some things. And I had 20 or more check boxes. Is your goal white-tailed deer habitat, or biodiversity, or saw timber production, or firewood production, or turkey habitat, or songbird habitat? I had all these squirrel habitat, all these different choices on here. The first several people I handed it to, they checked every single box. And that's great, that's awesome, but it also makes it incredibly complex because everything you do for management has a trade-off. If you want to grow an oak tree, release that tree, keep it healthy and vigorous, there's a trade-off. You have to cut something else to do that to make room. So everything has trade-offs. You can burn your woods for good reason. You can overburn your woods and damage your trees. So everything has trade-offs. Yeah. And then I already forgot.
Well, I was just going to make the comment. You're a pretty black and white guy, aren't you? It's no gray area with you at all.
There's a lot of room for gray area, but the more you learn at both ends of the spectrum, help you focus in on your goal.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Going back to the question, I think the question was, small parcel versus big parcel. What are the advantages from a forestry standpoint and disadvantages of each?
Okay, so if you're wanting to manage for, let's use white-tailed deer.
Well, I mean, for this podcast, just to make it simple, moving forward, let's start with, hey, we're managing white-tailed deer and turkey. And if there's exceptions to that, we can kind of talk to it. But I think that'll help the conversation.
So you got to think about the wildlife side of things a little bit. You want to provide them with food and cover, and you can do limited amounts of that on a small property. Obviously, wildlife are mobile. So they're going to go to other properties around you to find the niches that they need. So you can help meet some of those niches on your property and improve your forest or whatever habitat you have to help meet those wildlife goals. But you also got to realize that deer may use 5 square miles, and you're one small postage stamp on that entire landscape.
I get it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then last question around the small versus large parcel. How are you defining small parcel versus big parcel?
Loose terms. Yeah. If you think about it just from the average standpoint, the average landowner with about 12 acres. 12 acres is about 1 acre. 1 acre 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 is about it one of my perspectives is when you have a mature oak stand and it's time to regenerate that stand, new oak seedlings need lots of sunshine, and to do that you remove a major part of the overstory of the canopy. Well, doing that on a half acre might be successful. Doing it on 3 acres lets lots of sunlight in. Well, if you only own a 12-acre piece of land, having a 3-acre timber stand improvement or harvest may not be easy to stomach. So that affects how you will end up managing your stand in the long run. The trees you have now will not last forever. So you gotta manage that stand so it's meeting the needs in the future. Make sure you're regenerating the trees you want to regenerate.
You know, that was one of the biggest learnings I had from visiting with you is you have to actively manage your timber stand. You can't just think that, hey, you let it go and it's just going to be healthy.
Well, I think the correct answer to that is it depends on your objectives, Tim.
Yeah. So one of the biggest mistakes is probably to do nothing, and that it usually is going to lead to you're not going to maximize your goals, and you're probably going to end up with species that you don't want. So that's something to consider. Think about if you can wind a 130-year rotation of forest down into a year or less. If you planted your garden on May 1 and ignore it all summer long and come back in August to harvest, you're probably not going to have a very good harvest, and you're probably not going to get what you wanted. Similar with a forest, but you spread it out over 130 years. You may enter a particular tree stand for management purposes every 10 or 15 years to do a management activity. That helps you along the way to meet your goals in that long run. Like going back to the garden every 7 days or 10 days or however often in between weedings, and you're going out and weeding or watering or whatever you need to do. Those are intermediate practices along the way.
Yeah, I think that's a
good analogy.
Message I took away from that was, the worst thing you can do is to do nothing at all. And I grew up kind of in that environment that, it's bad to cut any tree, other than an obvious invasive tree or whatever. And that's certainly not the case from taken away from this.
That's a huge misnomer for our oak forests in Iowa.
Awesome. Okay, let's. So you got the objective. You're sitting down with Joel and Tim and Joel say, "Hey, we really want to manage turkey and deer here on this property," and you go on a timber cruise, what you called it. So what would that look like, and specifically, what are you trying to gather from that cruise?
Okay, so it starts with a really good aerial photo, which technology now is wonderful. We can have real high resolution and hill shade and lots of great things for reading high quality photos. We'll break up a property into different timber stands. And a stand of timber is a group of trees that are similar. Normally they're similar in size, which means they're probably similar in age class. They're similar in species type. I'll use a big umbrella and describe an oak hickory forest that has a majority of oak and hickory species, but there also may be included in that hackberry, black cherry, American elm, red elm, American basswood, a wide variety. But that stand itself we would classify as oak hickory. So once you identify that stand as being similar species class, then you help develop. We always measure stocking, relative stocking. What that is it's a yardstick for how well you're utilizing the growth capacity for each acre of forest. We measure stocking with a basal area prism, and we measure basal area through a stand. It gives us an even playing field of how to compare a stand to where you can lay it out on a stocking chart, and it'll show you on trees per acre if you could be growing more or less. If it's overstocked, that means you're crowded. Trees are crowded. Competition kills trees. So that's how you identify when to do timber stand improvements. So once you have stands of trees identified, then you can start making prescriptions for each stand to help meet the goals. If you want more sunshine on the ground for more herbaceous growth, you need to thin trees. You gotta let sunshine in. Okay, well, which trees are you going to thin? How are you going to go about doing that? Are you just going to eliminate one species? because you don't like them or you heard they were bad, may or may not be true? Or are you going to go to the specific trees that you want to favor? Let's say white oak. Great acorn for wildlife. The acorns are the most widely used food source in the forest by the most diverse group of wildlife. So it's not just deer and turkey we're talking about. But you may go to that white oak tree that's crowded by other competing trees around it and do what we call as a release, and release that tree from competition. So other trees that are crown touching around it get removed from the stand. That also lets sunlight to the ground. We're back to that original question. You wanted to get more herbaceous growth on the ground, in the canopy. Well, when do you do that and how much do you do? That's where we can help with that.
Yeah, I think that was that was the biggest aha for me. And we'll talk about TSI and the plan here in a little bit, but on the topic is when I got my plan that you developed, I was blown away by. I mean, I look at my forest as one, and you had broken it down into I think 4 different zones, based on the habitat, based on the soil, based on the water, based on I'm sure several different characteristics, but that's just changed my mind, changed my thinking.
And so much so that here we are a couple of years later. Now you're into your management plan a few years and executing some practices for habitat purposes, and now you're opening up your world and learning about more things. And just this year we walked a new portion of that area and thinking about going a step further and doing something else for other reasons.
Yeah.
So your perspective and your goals change.
Well, I think the big reason was you knew my list was getting shorter, so I needed to have a bigger list, right? So as I told you last time, every time I talk to you, I get a list for 5 years, and it's been about 5 years, so I'm due.
So think about forest management. You have that 120 or 130 year time frame. Well, to make it a working forest and to be able to execute some things and to show some progress and to build your confidence. If you've got 100 acres of woods and you want to work through all of it in a 10-year period, you do 10 acres a year. And in year 11, you're back to your first spot to reevaluate. Okay, is this achieving the goal I wanted it to or not? Is it time to do something else, or we sit and let the trees grow and thrive? So you get it into a working rotation and a working schedule.
And Jeremy, that whitetail and turkey objective that we started this conversation with, that may be a totally different approach if I said, no, I really want to be able to harvest wood ongoing through my generation, maybe even pass it down to my kids. I mean, that would be totally different, potentially totally different objectives.
If that is your only goal, that's correct, but they are not mutually exclusive. You can release that back to that white oak crop tree. You can pick a crop tree that's got perfect, beautiful saw log. It might be 50 years until harvest, but you can release that tree now for your acorn production. Releasing crop trees can increase acorn production by 7-fold. It can also double their annual diameter growth. So you can grow bigger saw logs faster. Everybody likes bigger trees, whether it's for saw log production or not. So you can grow bigger saw logs faster. You can have a bigger, healthier crown for acorn production. The more sunlight that's coming into that crown, the more acorns that tree can produce.
And if I put a gun up against your head and I said, hey, would you rather have one big tree in this room, or would you rather have 20 smaller trees, what would be your choice?
I might shoot back.
And the only reason I said with the gun is because I know what the answer was going to be. It depends. But
I would take one large tree, and I want it to be an oak. Yeah. Just there's a lot of natural beauty there too, and the fact that I know it's probably over 100 years old. It's pretty awesome.
Now I know you say you want it to be an oak, but I've seen you hug some of my walnut trees on my property, so I know you have a love for that too.
Every tree has its place. Some good, some bad. Bur oak, black oak like growing on a certain soil type or a certain aspect, a certain direction that hill faces. Black walnut likes a certain soil type, like a moist, well-drained soil, but down in the bottoms. That doesn't mean it won't grow on the hilltop. It just may not thrive. Yeah. So trees have having lots of diversity is super important, but having the right trees in the right place is also important.
Awesome.
And you can manage and change that during different timber stand improvement practices.
Tim, before we go to the next step here, any questions on?
No, I'm just, as he's going through this, I'm thinking about all the different little subforest areas I have on my property, and I'm going through the report that you did, and as we talked earlier before the show, you know, we've planted 650 some different types of trees. So I'm just listening and thinking about strategy, right, and what I have. So it's interesting.
So moving on to, so it sounds like kind of the output of the timber cruise and knowing what the objectives are, then you cruise the timber is a plan. You come up with a plan. You want to talk through what the plan looks like and what it consists of?
Yeah, so what we want to identify in the plan are the soil types. That helps you identify what direction you should head with some of your forest land. It doesn't tell you exactly what to do, it just identify what the ground land will support. Try to identify the historical aerial photos. You know, your forest today looks like forest. Well, why? The past land use there affected that forest stand to become what it is today. Is it native timber? Are they all north of 24-inch diameter oak trees? Really old, really mature? Or is it 8-inch diameter honey locust and Osage orange? That is probably because of the way the land was used. So identifying the past land use is important. The soil types are important. And we also provide information for just some generalized about endangered species, specifically Indiana bat, northern long-eared bat. All of our native bat species live in the forest in Iowa. And Indiana bat is federally endangered, and that's a species that we try not to do anything detrimental for them. The nice thing about Indiana bat is they migrate. They spend the winter south of us, so we can do forestry work during the dormant season and not have negative effects on them. In fact, by doing timber stand improvement and leaving some dead trees in the woods, we're improving their habitat because they like dead trees. They like to use the bark that hangs on dead trees. So invasive species, a lot of things. We talk a lot about oak regeneration. We're running out of oak in Iowa, so regenerating oak is super important to us. And so we provide a lot of guidelines from seedling all the way through maturity, how to maintain that oak and make sure you get oak back on that site, if that's what you want. Most of the time, that's a oak hickory forest. That's top in ownership or goals for landowners.
And is the oak because of the history of the state is kind of the natural predominant tree? Or?
Good question. So oak is our state tree, not any one specific oak, but oak is our state tree. There are 12 native oaks in Iowa. Most all of them would actually grow in this part of the state, which is pretty awesome. That doesn't mean we'll find every one of them on your particular property. But oak is definitely tied to our heritage. For furniture, there are barns made out of oak. There are barns scattered around the countryside still made out of black walnut. So settlers moved here. Yeah, we would never do that today.
No.
But it was definitely treated as a resource, and they used every bit that they could when early settlers were here. They needed to build houses. We still need to build furniture, so that it's all very important. From a habitat standpoint, you can't overlook the fact that the acorn supplies food for 537, I believe, different woodland pollinators. So that includes sites for egg development or larvae feeding on the tree somehow, or pollinators that need nectar. So super important. And the acorn is important for so many wildlife.
So on these, on the white oaks, what's how long can they live?
Oh yeah.
What's compared to some of the other species? I think that's important.
Yeah. There are oaks in Iowa that are documented from sprouting from 1694, about that time frame. So they did core studies on the trees to be able to count rings and to do that. So that's bad math here. That's north of 350 years old.
Compare that to a walnut.
I don't know really what the oldest walnut tree was, or has been, but a 24-inch walnut tree, if they grow really, really fast, a 24-inch walnut tree could be 90 or 100 years old if they really grew fast. It all depends on how fast they grow on a site. And it's not, when we're talking about how old of a tree we can grow, it's not really about, hey, how much is it growing every year? If it's an eighth of an inch or 3/4 of an inch, we don't really care. It's
about the habitat it provides, yeah.
Some of the oldest trees in Iowa are white oak, bur oak, cedar, which is our native juniper tree. Very old cedar trees in Iowa, in some places.
It's amazing, isn't it?
The other thing is, I know I'm digressing here. I also planted some bald cypress. They'll live a long time too, right?
They can. They're really unique. They're not native to Iowa. They have very good track history at not spreading, so not being an invasive species. In their native range, which is probably as far north as maybe Interstate 70. So we're a couple hundred miles removed on native range. We don't see much for winter damage on them, except for extremely cold winters. Cool tree. So we get kind of a confused tree. It has needles, but it's deciduous, so it drops its needles in the fall. Brilliant orange fall color. They like having their feet wet, but they will tolerate a lot of soil types.
Yeah, interesting.
Kind of circling back to the plan. So,
Sorry.
No, not at all.
That's why I find it interesting.
So, what does the plan look like physically? What does it look like? And if someone's going to look at a plan, what are they going to get out of that?
Yeah, normally you'll be able to you'll have a document that you'll be able to read through and keep for a long time. So you'll have your stand descriptions and prescriptions for those stands. And if it meets your goals, if it doesn't meet your goals, talk with your conservation planner, your forester, whoever you're working with, and say, hey, this something else might fit better here. What are the trade-offs? And see, and that's maybe a revision to the plan to do something different. But once you have that document, that's your roadmap for, hey, this is what we ought to be focusing on for a 10 or 15 year period. Now that opens up the whole opportunity if you want to try to apply for cost share programs, help offset some of your expenses to implement practices. All right.
Yeah, and let's just go right into that. I had step 4 is, okay, now you got the plan. There's some action that needs to take place, right? So what are some of those programs? We talked with Kevin in the previous episode around programs, if that's the right term, but what's available for a person that has a forest and has the plan done, and what's available for them?
There will be some commonalities in your discussion there, Chad, with Kevin, too. One of the most popular programs in Iowa is our state cost share program through REAP, Resource Enhancement and Protection. So there's a part of REAP that's provided for public spaces, green spaces, parks, bike trails. There's also a part of it that's for private land management. So you go through your local Natural Resources Conservation Service office and apply through there, and once you have a forestry plan, you can apply for a REAP cost share. So if you're ready to do a forestry practice, you can put in for a REAP cost share application. Forestry is a long process. Getting a plan, site visit, and getting a plan, and getting applied for cost share, getting approved for cost share, and then actually implementing the practice. This can all be a year, sometimes more. But REAP and forestry, REAP can help offset about 75% of the expenses to implement that plan.
Go ahead.
In addition to that, we have federal programs, EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentive Program. Environmental Quality Incentive Program. EQIP is a very large cost share program for a lot of different practices. It sort of opens up the world your property to a whole lot of options for practices. Payment rates are different with different cost share programs. They all have maximums. You can't just sign up and get a whole bunch of extra money with no ceiling. That's not true. So you'll know, depending on which program you're going into, there'll be payment rates or maximums that you'll know. Before you sign the dotted line to do something, you'll know what your expenses will be. EQIP is sort of this big behemoth of a program, but it provides the forest landowner up to 2 years to execute a project, which means you really could do a really large project, do part A in year 1, do part B in year 2, and cover a lot of acres if you really wanted to do that.
Okay. And what is one of the more typical actions coming out of the REAP or EQIP or any other program that it's going to be available for?
Tree planting to establish new stands and timber stand improvement. Those are certainly the most common practices. Then we start getting a little farther down the list. We get into brush management. That's specifically for invasive species control, edge feathering for edge habitat.
We talked a lot of edges with Kevin, so
that's
we
a
can.
huge, often a missing link for habitat on a lot of land.
Awesome. So let's talk. I mean, let's just go right down the list that you mentioned here. So tree planting. What should a landowner take in consideration when planting trees?
Okay, so there's two types of tree planting in Iowa. One is in the woods, where you're normally planting by hand. So if you had a timber harvest and you want to replant, or if you had an oak wilt pocket, killed the trees and you want to replant, or if you have a stand of undesirable trees, we'll call weed trees, and you want to convert that to oak hickory. So you're going into those stands, you're killing competition, usually killing weed trees, and you're hand planting seedlings. And so because you're hand planting, you dial the numbers way back, and you might plant 200 or 300 seedlings per acre. So that's in the timber stands. Conversely, if you have an open field, whether it's cropland or pasture land, and you want to do any reforestation, in those sites you can plant with a machine. So you might plant 500, maybe 1,000 seedlings per acre. All right, so those are the different ways that we use tree planting to help meet the goals. You're managing your vegetation, you're changing your species component, probably going from one species group to another, because you can add in a lot of diversity with plantations.
And that is all. The planting should be and is based on what the objective is that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. So the trees you plant will need to match your soil types, and they need to match your goals, your long-term goals, what you want to grow there. If it's way up on a high hill and you want saw timber production, you're making a mistake to plant black walnut. They won't thrive on that particular site. So that's where a forester can help you get the right trees on the right soil type. And maintenance, all tree plantings are a lot of work. Usually we bite off little chunks, 3, 5, 10 acres maybe. Maintenance is important. If you're planting into, say, a pasture or some kind of perennial grass, that is major competition for your tree seedlings and potentially causes a lot of mortality. So site preparation to kill some of that grass, plant your seedling, and then during the next 2 growing seasons, keeping the grass killed will help increase your success. And normally that's done with herbicides. Herbicides are relatively inexpensive, very effective, and normally easy to apply.
There are herbicides out there that you can apply that kill everything but the tree?
Yeah, actually there are. So we use specific products that are forestry labeled. When you're doing your site prep before the seedlings are planted, you have lots of options.
Scorch earth.
Yeah, if you need to, yeah. Once the trees are planted in the ground, then we normally do dormant season herbicide applications. Maybe, for us, for this part of Iowa, maybe an application in November. or maybe an application at the end of March or beginning of April before the buds expand and leaf out.
And what kind of herbicide would that be?
Yeah, so it depends on, there's a lot.
Okay.
If you're trying to control...
Good question.
Yeah, if
I
you're
get
trying
it, I
to
get it.
control, say, a broadleaf weeds with a pre-emergent, we would often use Princep 4L. If you're trying to control perennial grasses with the pre-emergent, that means you've already killed the grass and you've got basically bare ground. You want to keep any more from germinating, we use maybe Pendulum, a pendimethalin product. Then if you have really good, well-calibrated equipment, there are some other products, maybe Oust, labeled for forestry. Gives you a little bit of contact control and pre-emergent control, but doesn't kill your trees.
Yeah.
Nice.
You know, these herbicide companies have marketing people that that's all their job is what should we name this
Right.
disease so they sound badass, right? This
Yeah.
stuff you're gonna.
That's probably important.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the tree planting, please. Pretty straightforward. Just one last question on that. You mentioned tree planting equipment. Is that you rent? Is that a local thing you rent? Does the state provide that? What options are available?
Man, great question. So, if you have unlimited money, you can buy everything you want, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different tools. Dibble bars are real common for hand planting, or just a round nose sand shovel. Sometimes you can borrow dibble bars or rent dibble bars. Maybe check with your county conservation board or your local state forest if there's one near you, and maybe be able to rent or borrow dibble bars. Getting up into machine planting, there are quite a few forestry contractors in Iowa, and they have machines for planting seedlings. They hook them up with a tractor, and away they go. So you can stick in 600 or 1,000 seedlings an hour and really put some trees in the ground. There are also some of the...
That's amazing. I mean, that's just amazing. I would love to watch that.
Right.
It must be something.
And
on
that's all
YouTube.
mechanical. I mean, it's not someone in the back doing this.
It's a little bit of both. So
Okay.
there's someone riding on the planter. Yeah.
Sounds
You need
safe.
Someone experienced, and you need to go. You got to drive slow. You got to do a really good job. You kid around that the roots go down. Well, yeah, duh, but there's a lot more to it. Bad planting practices, incorrect technique kills a lot of trees. The root collar needs to be below the ground line, about an inch. Well, that's pretty particular. If you can't identify, if you don't know what the root collar is on the seedling, you probably shouldn't be the guy right on the planter. And then the soil
that would
needs-
not be me.
We'd have to have that center line.
I'd be out. Yeah, I'd
And
be
then
out.
the soil needs to be packed around the roots, so there's no air pockets. So you need root to soil contact. Just like if you're doing a prairie seeding, you need seed to soil contact. So that furrow, after you drive the planter through and plant that tree, that furrow needs to close up real nice. Well, the way you test that is with a 2-finger tug. If you can tug that seedling out of the ground, you're not getting a furrow closed up tight. Worst case would be if the deer walk down the road behind you and pull the seedlings out of the ground. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but it can happen.
I've seen it. So like when we'd use the dibble stick or the dibble bar, we planted a ton of white oaks and black cherries and stuff. And the next day we found a bunch that were just sitting out, and the deer would just go up there and they'd get it and trying to nip off the top, they pull the whole tree out.
Yeah, they're looking for something easy to eat. You
Yeah.
bet. So another way to get a tree planting machine, I think I forgot to mention, Pheasants Forever chapters, National Wild Turkey Federation chapters, they often partner a lot of times with your local county conservation board, or maybe your soil and water conservation district, which is at your NRCS office. So there are sometimes tree planters around that you can rent or borrow as well.
Thanks for listening or watching our show. We have some exciting topics and guests coming up.
We ask that you subscribe to our channel on YouTube and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
We look forward to hearing your suggestions for topics.
Questions and comments. This is Two Dumbasses signing off. Until next time,
Be safe,
have fun, and get outdoors.